Our last speaker has crossed the Atlantic to be here. Mark Steyn, Canadian-born American commentator, author, and free speech advocate. He has written several books on free speech. His latest book is about his free speech battle with one of the stars of the global warming movement, Michael Mann. And last but not least, Mark is one of the recipients of the Sappho Award. Please welcome Mark Steyn.
Thank you very much. I'll try to enunciate clearly because Scandinavians speak much better English than we do in North America. It's a great thrill to be here with so many old friends, particularly Katrine, who's doing a terrific job with the Free Press Society, and it's always an honor to be here. When I accepted this invitation, I was looking forward to it. I woke up this morning and I was sent an email saying that Her Majesty's government in London had advised British subjects not to go to Copenhagen today and to steer clear of Christiansborg because of the danger of this event. So I can't tell you what a thrill it is. Just a few years ago, you had to be in this much danger, you had to go to the Sunni Triangle or Helmand province, and now you can just go to Copenhagen. And it's And it was also a useful exercise in the general uselessness of government, because of course I got this email from Douglas's splendid British Foreign Office after I'd landed in Copenhagen. So it was too late to do anything about it, really. But it is wonderful to be here, and I think on this occasion I would like to talk about, as Douglas did, about some of the things we have learned in the last 10 years. I was here for the 5th anniversary of the cartoons, and I think of the people who were on stage with me then. Lars Hedegaard, who's here today, who was shot at point-blank range by a fortunately incompetent gunman, and Lars's life has changed dramatically. Also on stage with me that day was Lars Vilks, whose event here in Copenhagen in February was shot up by a less incompetent gunman, and 2 people died in this city that day. So Lars Vilks now finds his freedom of movement highly subscribed. Also on stage with me in Copenhagen 5 years ago was the Dutch cartoonist Neckshot, who was obliged to appear in a full-length burqa from head to toe that day, and now no longer publishes cartoons. So there have been a lot of changes in the last 5 years, and not for the good. At the time I was here 5 years ago, a lady called Molly Norris, who was a cartoonist with the Seattle Weekly on the west coast of the United States, had organized something called Everybody Draw Muhammad Day. She wasn't a militant, she just kind of blundered into it. She was a fan of the television show South Park, and they had an episode censored by their network because it had a very mild Muhammad joke in it. It had a joke, in fact, about not showing Muhammad. That's another of the changes now. It's not that you just can't make a joke showing Muhammad, you can't make a joke about not showing Muhammad. So the network that South Park is on cancelled this episode, and she organised Everybody Draw Muhammad Day, not because she's like insane right-wing nutjob, but just because she didn't know that there was a big fuss about this guy called Muhammad. She lived in this perfect liberal bubble where she didn't know there was anything. She thought drawing Muhammad was like making jokes of Mitt Romney for being a Mormon. because Mormons are supposed to wear a special, I don't know whether there's any Mormons in the house today, but they're supposed to have a special kind of underwear. And so people like to make jokes about Mormon underwear. And she thought making a joke about Muhammad was like making a joke about Mormon underwear. Everyone would find it hilarious. And instead she found out that people are far more sensitive about Muhammad than they are about Mormon underwear. And so while I was here in Denmark 5 years ago, the Seattle Weekly published an editorial saying, you may be wondering where Molly Norris's cartoon is this week. There won't be one anymore appearing in the magazine because there is, quote, there is no more Molly. Quote, there is no more Molly. An American citizen had just had her entire identity evaporated because she had made a joke about Muhammad. The President of the United States has never said a word about this, about the way an entire life can be eliminated for making a joke about Muhammad. He did, however, 3 years ago, this very month, stand up at the United Nations and tell the world the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. I have listened to some praise for Prime Minister Rasmussen today, and I've heard more critical remarks about Norwegian government ministers. But I have to say there is no greater betrayal of the Western inheritance than the words that President Obama used at the United Nations 3 years ago. And because of attitudes like that, there is no more Molly, and there is no more neck shot, and certainly, as we've heard earlier, there is no more Shab, and there is no more Kabu, and there is no more George Walensky or the others who died at the offices of Charlie Hebdo. And almost everyone who mattered at that publication was slaughtered. And we managed to insult them in death, as Douglas was talking about. We demonstrated how much we value free speech by having a hashtag and carrying a pencil. And none of those people who seized on Je suis Charlie as the cause du jour, from Angela Merkel and François Hollande to George Clooney, he waved a pencil. Dame Helen Mirren from the artier end of the British film industry, she wore a little pencil decorative brooch. That's how much she was Charlie. She had a little decorative pencil brooch when she went to, I think it was the Golden Globes. Of the thousands in the streets of Paris, the millions across the internet, none of them were willing to do the one thing that would have mattered and show the reason why they died, which is why, as Douglas was saying, Mahmoud Abbas from the PLO, which has a magnificent record on free speech, from Turkey, Sultan Erdogan's vizier, his prime minister, they were happy to march in the big post-slaughter parade. Do you think either of those guys would have been there if any of the deceased's multitudes of new friends had been holding up Charlie magazine covers in that vigil instead of those pencils? So the cowardly and evasive support that the world showed this January, I think, was a very clear lesson to working cartoonists and writers in the limits of global solidarity for free speech and how it's likely to go next time. Oh, don't worry, we'll be sad when you die too. Maybe not quite as sad as Charlie Hebdo, because, been there, done that. but don't worry, we'll still be a little bit sad. David Cameron, who's almost as big a champion of free speech as Mahmoud Abbas, David Cameron immediately went back to the UK and appointed the British police. As you know, they're the new art commissars in the United Kingdom. They went to British newsagents and asked for the names and addresses of people who came in and bought the commemorative issue of Charlie Hebdo. And that's how committed to free speech Mr. Cameron's country is. And it's the same, and they say, well, we're only doing this on security grounds. It's like the painting couldn't be shown in the Mall on security grounds. We're only going and finding out who's buying Charlie Hebdo on security grounds. We're only cancelling your appearance at this university on security grounds. We're only saying this book can't be published on security grounds. Security has effectively become the new shut up. You know, you can't say anything because of the security. That's why we're here. That's why we can't be in, what was that splendid theatre we passed last night? The Royal Theatre? We can't be there on security grounds. Security grounds are the new shut up. And that's why this issue has to be won before there's nothing left to win. I think it would be a lot easier, for example, it seems to me perfectly obvious, as we heard earlier, that all the people that Chancellor Merkel is welcoming into her country are unlikely to be great friends of free speech. They come from countries with no tradition of free speech. So that means there are going to be a lot more security grounds. There'll be, if she's planning on welcoming in 1 million refugees this year and 1 million next year, that's 2 million more reasons, 2 million more security grounds, 2 million more reasons why this event won't be able to take place, and those cartoons can't be published, and that painting can't be shown, and we'll need to take your name and address if you want to buy this magazine. And that is one lesson we have learnt in the last 10 years. When I was here 5 years ago, I think somebody brought up, which is the reason, frankly, a lot of us foreigners know about Copenhagen, is Hans Christian Andersen and his famous story of the Emperor's New Clothes. And it is very depressing, 10 years after the Danish cartoon crisis, to have to report that your greatest writer got it wrong. When the little boy points out that the emperor has new clothes, in the end of the story, everybody is laughing at the naked emperor. We have learnt in the last 10 years that when a few brave people, like Lars Hedegaard and others, actually point out that the emperor has no clothes, that the emperor of multiculturalism stands entirely naked, people don't thank the little boy for pointing him out. They club him to a pulp. They don't want to hear from him. They have no desire for the little boy to speak up. That is why what is going on with the refugee crisis is like some perverse inversion of the emperor's new clothes. You know, to a fool, your majesty, these people getting off German trains appear to be well-dressed and well-fed and to meet no known definition of refugee that has ever existed. But to a wise man such as yourself, they are bedraggled women and children in rags, desperate for a new life. We have entirely inverted the basic principle of Hans Christian Andersen's story, and we now punish every little boy who points out that our rulers have no clothes. I was very struck by something Douglas said when he said that he never thought we would be able to say the word seriously. You know, if 11 years ago anyone had said we'd be using the word cartoon crisis. Shortly after the cartoon crisis, I had the honour of meeting President Bush in the Oval Office. And I know people thought President Bush was not the most articulate of American leaders. He didn't have the sophisticated wit of Monsieur Sarkozy, for example. So people have mixed views about President Bush. But I asked him about these Islamic provocations, and he said a marvelous line to me that he wasn't really interested in trying to worry about what upset Muslims. He said, it's always something. If it's not the Crusades, it's the cartoons. And I thought that was a terrific... I thought that was a terrific line, and actually should be on a bumper sticker, because it encapsulates entirely Islam's lack of proportion in its response. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. You can invade Afghanistan and occupy it for a decade and a half, or you can just put a little swirl on a Burger King ice cream tub that looks a bit like the Arabic writing for Allahu Akbar, and everyone will still go bananas. It doesn't matter. It can be one or the other. There's no sense of proportion. If it's not the Crusades, it's the cartoons. So I think that reaction is a given. That reaction is a given. So what mattered, always mattered about the cartoons, was how we reacted, how the civilized world reacted. And the reason the reason this has been a disastrous 10 years is because we utterly failed. We have with us today one of the few publishers and editors who was willing actually to show readers what the fuss was about. My publisher in Canada, Ezra Levant, also was someone who was prepared to do it. I think we were discussing earlier, 6 newspapers in Norway showed the cartoons. That's more than the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada combined. And the fact of the matter is that once people were threatening to kill and actually killing for them, they should have been on the front page of Le Monde, and they should have been on the front page of the London Times, and they should have been on the front page of Die Welt, and they should have been on the front page of Corriere della Sera, and every major newspaper around the planet. CNN showed the cartoon with Muhammad's face pixelated. You know the way they do. They pixelate the face when you've entered the witness protection program in the United States. And you haven't quite had your facial reconstruction surgery, and so they interview you with your face all blurry. That's how they showed Muhammad's face. A guy who died 1,300 years ago. He's not in the witness protection program. It's Lars who's in the witness protection program, and nobody in this rotten media here pixelates his face, but we pixelate some bloke who died in the 7th century. His face. And by the way, that's why the attitude on Charlie Hebdo was so contemptible. Because those guys died because they were made to bear a burden that they should not have had to bear. And they only had to bear that burden because nobody else would share it. Because my magazine in Canada, which was subsequently prosecuted and went out of business, the government of Alberta put the publisher, my friend Ezra, through the ringer for 3 years. Because of a complaint by some illiterate, half-wit imam who didn't even know what were the real cartoons and what were the fake cartoons. that they threw in to make them look more controversial. That magazine went out of business. There were 6 newspapers in Norway. But otherwise, all the big players in the European media, in the global media, stayed out of it. And so one little satirical magazine in Paris had to bear the entire burden, and they all wound up dead because of it. And even when they all wound up dead, because the New York Times and the London Times and Le Monde and all the rest hadn't had the courage to show those cartoons 10 years ago, and so had placed that burden on Charlie Hebdo, even when they're all lying in a pool of blood in their offices in Paris, all the Bigfoot media went and repeat the same mistakes they made all over again. They wouldn't show us the Charlie Hebdo covers. As Douglas said, these are people who congratulate themselves. It's an industry that gives itself awards back and forth for bravery and courage and bravery all the time. Far more than soldiers and firemen do. Soldiers and firemen don't hold awards nights giving themselves, oh, you were incredibly brave. You single-handedly charged a Taliban machine gun nest, and we're giving you they don't hold awards nights for themselves the way the media do. When they had one opportunity to show bravery, they failed it 10 years ago, and they failed it again in January. As the writer Andrew Stiles put it, journalists, these French journalists and cartoonists are so brave. Readers, hey, great, what did they do? Can I see it? Journalists, sorry, it's our policy not to show it to you. That was the attitude of the Western media. They weren't holding up a pencil. They weren't holding up a pencil. As feeble as that gesture was, they weren't even doing that. They were holding out a little, I don't know, you must have it here in Denmark, a little, what they call Tipex in the United Kingdom, or whiteout in the little brush, a little brush you use when you can just paint out something that you've typed that you don't want anybody to see. That's what they were holding up, not a pencil. These laws come back again and again. No matter how often you kill the hate speech laws, the approach of Western elites is that they know better than us, and it is in our interest to regulate speech and to mediate between people who believe in free speech and people who are willing to kill for free speech. When I had my own difficulties in Canada that Douglas touched on, we won. And one result of that was that the House of Commons in Ottawa repealed the hate speech law. And the Canadian Senate guys, who weren't that friendly towards me, they took a little longer to repeal the hate speech law. And then it went for what they call royal assent, which I assume you have the same thing here in Denmark, where the bill gets signed into law, which, as Douglas, I think everyone here now is a citizen of a constitutional monarchy. You'll know that's not something that is meant to be delayed about. It's supposed to be automatic. Mysteriously, royal assent for this repeal of the hate speech law took an unconscionable time in the Canadian Parliament. So they were dragged kicking and screaming into repealing this law, the hate speech law. And then no sooner had it been done than, as Douglas mentioned, Bill 59 in Quebec comes up all over again, in which the guy who's proposing it is doing it, he says, because he's concerned about terrorism. And his solution to terrorism is that the best way to stop it is to make it a crime for people to write anything against the Islamic religion, as he sees. This guy's name, by the way, is Jacques Frémont, and I would like him to be a household name around the world. He deserves to be better known because he has absolutely no concept of what it means to be a free-born citizen in a Western democratic free society, where ideas are tested in the public square, and the best ideas win and the worst ideas lose. And if you tip the scales and you say, well, yes, our idea isn't very good, and we don't want to go on television shows and debate it particularly because, you know, we're not that good and we don't want to be bothered with that. Well, I don't really want, I can barely write in whatever language of the country it is I'm living in, so I'd rather not write an op-ed for the newspaper. I'd just as soon kick open the door, shout Allahu Akbar and shoot you. And when you say, when you tip the scales and you say, we're going to accept your approach to debating technique. So what our object now is not to win the debate, but to prevent the debate taking place. Because we don't want all this unpleasant terrorism. And as Jacques Frémont and his government in Quebec say, it is necessary, in order to save freedom, it is necessary to throttle it. So this is what we in the rest of the world, other than Scandinavia, call Stockholm Syndrome. This is where you take on the characteristics of your oppressors. One of Islam's most stupid arguments is, if you say we're crazy and violent, we'll go nuts and kill you. And this is essentially the argument that the government of Quebec has accepted. Because Muslims go nuts at the slightest provocation, we will ban the slightest provocation, and therefore you will have no longer any need to go nuts. Good luck with that. Good luck with that, making that work. Halfway through his legal ordeal, my friend Ezra Levant observed that one day the Danish cartoons crisis would be seen as a more critical event than the attacks of September 11th. And he was wrong, obviously, in terms of the comparative death tolls, but he was absolutely right in what each revealed about the state of Western civilization in the 21st century. In the long run, the ostensibly trivial matter of some not terribly good drawings in an obscure newspaper in a nation, no disrespect to anyone here, a nation way out on the periphery of the horizon, somewhere up near the Arctic Circle. It will prove to be a more important signifier of the collapse of Western civilization than a direct violent assault on the citadels of American power in Washington and New York. Because if you provoke, obviously, and on the scale of 9/11, even Western civilization in its present decayed state will feel obliged to respond. I mean, you know, they did it and they didn't care about it. Mullah Omar, on September the 10th, when he gave Osama bin Laden the go-ahead to launch the attacks, he didn't care that America had the biggest nuclear arsenal on the planet. He obviously wasn't, he didn't feel frightened that they were going to nuke Afghanistan or anything. He felt perfectly safe giving Osama bin Laden the license to do that. But if you provoke on that scale, everyone feels obliged to respond. So yes, if they blow up St. Peter's, if they blow up the Eiffel Tower, then yes, they will get a response. But the cartoon crisis confirmed to our enemies that at heart we don't really believe in ourselves anymore, that we won't defend our core liberties, and that you can steal them from us one little bit at a time. You know, a cartoon is a small thing. It's not the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. It's not a big work. People do it. People get a pencil and they do a little sketch and it's in the paper the next day and they forget about it. And it's a funny thing. It makes you laugh. And a joke is an important signifier of society. A joke is a small thing, but it's part of the societal glue. It's what holds us together. Jokes are about recognition. When you tell a joke, people understand the social norms that are being mocked in a joke. and it's because it's part of the glue that holds you together. And in a multicultural society, there are fewer jokes, because you have to be terribly sensitive about everything all the time. You don't even have to worry about Kalashnikovs. If you tell the wrong kind of joke about someone who's transgendered or gay or has an attitude to climate change, you can have your career ended in the United States. A woman made a joke about catching AIDS in Africa as she was getting on the flight at JFK Airport in New York, and by the time she got off the plane in Johannesburg, she'd been fired from her job. Her entire world had collapsed. Sir Tim Hunt, FRS PhD, he's got post-nominals coming out of his butt, that guy. He's a Nobel laureate, but he made a joke at some conference in Korea, and by the time he'd got to London, his career was over. Steve Martin, a big-time Hollywood comedian, he made a joke about the name of an Italian restaurant. He had to delete the tweet, he had to apologize it. So jokes are an increasingly sensitive thing. Now you have a situation, now we live in a world, though, where they don't just want to end your career. These people are so serious about jokes, cartoons, gags, that they want to kill you about it. We have, and our response is to send in the police just to examine the issue of Charlie Hebdo, to see whether, so the head of jokes at the Metropolitan Police in London will determine whether it's legal for people to see this joke. They might be laughing at the wrong joke, and we couldn't have that, could we? Who knows what would happen? Do you know, there used to be a place, we heard about it earlier, there used to be a place where this sort of thing happened. It was there was this big thing they used to have, nobody remembers it anymore, but they used to have this big thing in Europe called the Iron Curtain. Anyone remember that? And on the other side of the Iron Curtain, they took jokes very seriously. Milan Kundera's first novel was called The Joke. It's about a guy who he's got looking at a promising career in the Czechoslovakian Communist Party. And then he makes one wrong joke that he sends on a postcard to his girlfriend, and he's expelled from the party, and he winds up working in the coal mines. And that's who used to police jokes, Soviet commissars. And now we have created a situation in the Western world where we now have absorbed the state's authority to regulate and license jokes. And the correct attitude of all those people who intervened in the politicians who spoke up and said, I completely deplore the offence that was given by this cartoon, was completely wrong. You should just say, look, we're in a free society and we don't regulate jokes here. If you want to live somewhere where they regulate jokes, go to Zimbabwe, where it's illegal. There were so many jokes made about Robert Mugabe's penis falling off due to syphilis, and it being replaced by a rubber penis made for him by the Chinese, that they passed a law saying you can't make a joke about Robert Mugabe having a Chinese-made rubber penis. So if you want to find a politician who wants to comment on a joke, go ask Robert Mugabe or his Attorney General, who will put you on trial for it. But in free societies, we do not regulate jokes. If you don't like the joke, fine. But if you're going to get upset about it, what are you getting upset about? There's people being blown up in madrasas, there's people dying all over the Muslim world, and you're upset about cartoons? Grow up, get a life. But as President Bush said, if it's not the Crusades, it's the cartoons. Terrorism doesn't succeed by hijacking airliners. my compatriot George Jonas said a couple of years ago. That's not how it works. Terrorism's point isn't to hijack the airliners. It's to hijack the debate. And that is why how successful terrorism works. It terrorizes you into wanting to avoid certain subjects. Katrine who is the wife of one of the Boston Marathon bombers. And she was a conventional New England schoolgirl who fell in love with a young Muslim man from Dagestan in Boston, a refugee, a genuine refugee, I think, unlike so many of the ones rampaging around Europe today. So she converted to Islam, and she wound up under her veil as a battered wife. And that is the condition that we are taking when we let core Western liberties be assaulted by people who have nothing but contempt for them. The veil is descending on us, and we are staggering around like a battered wife, trying to persuade ourselves that the person slugging us in the kisser means well and is doing it only because they care about us. Successful terrorism persuades the terrorized that in fact you've had an attack of conscience. That's why after 9/11, across Europe and North America and Australia, Muslim immigration accelerated. It's quite astonishing that. It's never happened in human history before, but after 9/11, the obligation was on us, the battered wife, to demonstrate that we had learned our lesson by increasing Muslim immigration. So we ramped it up. And so, likewise, we are supportive of those like Katrine who convert in record numbers. Instead of mourning the loss of inheritance from someone who lives in Scandinavia or in Massachusetts and converts to Islam, we feel we ought to celebrate it. And likewise, when people do cartoons disrespecting the Prophet Muhammad, we feel that it's sensitive for us to show that we share their sense of how offensive it is to put the Prophet Muhammad in a cartoon. And so we're not refusing to show the cartoons because we're scared and we're frightened and we're terrified they're going to blow us up, which Jyllands-Posten were honest enough to admit. No. The New York Times and all these other high-minded people say, no, we're not showing these cartoons because it would cause grave offense to the sensitivities of our Muslim readers. These Muslim readers are so sensitive that all over the internet, you can be chopping some guy's head off in Syria or Iraq, and it will go viral and recruit hundreds of thousands of people around the world to support your cause. So there seem to be these people are such experts at the New York Times. They seem to understand these kind of twin approaches to sensitivity. A 7-year-old Australian boy in the Syrian desert holding up the head, a proud head. Well, the head's not proud. The head has a rather enigmatic expression, but the boy is proud because his dad has just chopped off his head. And that's not insensitive at all. That's fine. But somehow, if you have a cartoon of Muhammad, we have to be careful. We have to be very sensitive. We have to be very, very sensitive about this. The fanatics who threatened violence and then committed violence over the Muhammad cartoon, they made an offer to the Western world. It was a crude offer. But this was the deal. Either we kill you or you kill free speech. And for the last 10 years, that is what we have spent doing. Jyllands-Posten would not publish those cartoons today. When Yale University Press wrote a book about it. Not only did they not show the cartoons that the book was about, by the way, the book was anti the cartoons. The book was actually by some academics saying, oh, this was just some cheap provocation, there's no issue here with the cartoons. But Yale University Press nevertheless refused to show the cartoons. And furthermore, they refused to show any depictions of Muhammad. This lady's point, she dwelt on representations of Muhammad throughout Western art that are hanging in the great museums of the world. They refused to publish those too. So in effect, Yale University Press extended the decision not to publish the Muhammad cartoons to the entirety of Western art. I got so tired of I don't have a lot of time for journalism professors anyway, but I got tired of the ones who said after the cartoons, the right to free speech sometimes means the right not to publish, as if they were taking a principled decision here. And I got all these other letters from people throughout all these last 10 years. What do you care about Denmark? It's some small country up near the Arctic Circle. What does it matter what goes on in Denmark? Why make a fuss about these cartoons? Then when I got into trouble in Canada, people would write and say, what do you care about Canada anyway? It's just some small country up near the Arctic Circle, next to Denmark. Nobody knows. What do you care? You can make a pretty nice living in America. Yale University Press, which is in New Haven, Connecticut, suddenly they won't show the cartoons in their book. So this, in the most powerful nation on earth, that one of the two most prestigious intellectual institutions of that country no longer has the courage to show those. So it starts in Denmark, this peripheral, nothing little country up near the Arctic Circle. Then it moves to Canada, this peripheral, nothing little country up near the Arctic Circle. Next thing you know, Yale University has turned Connecticut into some obscure peripheral country up near the Arctic Circle. How far does it have to creep? How far does it have to creep? This is how we lose. This is how we lose, not through the murderous provocations of 9/11, but surrendering liberties one by one, inch by inch. And that is why I'm so proud to be here, as Douglas said, in this small, peripheral, unimportant country up near the Arctic Circle, because you have actually, you actually show some of us. You actually show the big shots at the New York Times and the London Times and the Sydney Morning Herald, all the rest, of how important it is to stand and defend this line. People said to me, why are you having it in Copenhagen? It's a crazy town. It's like, have you seen this British Foreign Office advice not to go there? It's the new Yemen. Why go there? Why don't you just hold it on the internet? Because we can hold it on the internet. Then it's just je suis Charlie. Oh, I've got a cute hashtag. It's like when Michelle Obama, when the Nigerian girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram, and she held up a hashtag on a piece of cardboard. I didn't even know they worked on cardboard hashtags. I thought you had to be on a computer to get them to work. But bring back our girls. The hashtag didn't work. The girls have all been sold into sex slavery. So we could all stay on the internet and hold up the hashtag. And it doesn't work, because we'll have a little bit of cyberspace, and inch by inch, our enemies will take the civilized world. Then they said to me, oh, don't hold it in Copenhagen, it's a crazy country, it's as dangerous as Somalia or Waziristan, you can't go there. Why don't you hold it in Texas or New Hampshire, where at least there's a spot when someone goes Allahu Akbar, everyone will fire back and shoot him dead, and there'll be no problem. And there's a lot of and I quite like that one, to be honest. But I'm not prepared to surrender an inch of the civilized world to barbarians, which is the choice that we have been faced with. And I'm not prepared to watch the lights go out on Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Slovenia and Belgium and Luxembourg and Canada and Australia and then think that, you can have one little redoubt where liberty will thrive. I take the same view to the civilized world that Islam takes to the Dar al-Islam. Once we hold this forever, and we will not surrender it. And we have had... And we have had pessimism today, and pessimism is warranted. The outlook is not good because of this huge gulf between our ruling elites and the people they claim to represent. They've essentially broken the bond on which representative democracy depends. Governments have legitimacy because they represent the will of the people. If they no longer represent the will of the people, then they have delegitimized themselves. And on this issue, as Douglas pointed out, 93% of the British people want an end to immigration. Two-thirds in the recent polls in Germany, two-thirds of Germans do not want to welcome hundreds of thousands of migrants. The compact between the rulers and the ruled is that they represent us. They do not represent abstractions like one world multiculturalism. They do not represent foreign people that they happen to have fetishized and they find more appealing. They represent the citizenry of the nation that they are elected to represent. And one day, Western leaders will learn that lesson. Now, I've learned since my own legal difficulties, and I want to end with this because it is hard to get optimistic about this. But I have never felt more liberated on this issue than I do standing before you today. The minute I was dragged into 3 Canadian courts, the statutory penalty would have been a lifetime publishing ban for me in my own country. I could never have been published there again. And I fought back, and we won, and we delegitimized the process to the point where they repealed this law. And ever since then, I have never felt scared by any government commissar presuming to regulate my speech. What scares me is the world that this malign alliance of the multicultural left and Islamic imperialism, the world that they are constructing for us. I don't want to live in that world. I don't want my children to live in that world. And so all I can do is defend the one we have. And no commissar can tell me what I can write or what I can draw. And if my fellow Quebecers in Quebec City are stupid enough to pass Bill 59 and attempt to enforce it, I will write and say what I want throughout the province of Quebec, and they can prosecute me all they want. It didn't work out too well for the guys who tried it last time round, but they are never, ever going to silence me on this. And that is all we can do. All we can do is live as free people and refuse to accept this malign alliance of soft totalitarians and hard totalitarians telling us we no longer can live as free people. So walk out of this room and say to yourself, the next time we hold this meeting, we are going to be in that Royal Theatre or whatever it's called, and there's going to be more of us, and we're going to do what we should have done 10 years ago. We're going to share the risk, as Ayaan Hirsi Ali puts it, so that no matter how many people they kill, it will never be enough, because they're going to need the world's biggest credit line at the Bank of Jihad, because they are going to have to kill everyone. And they will never be, they can do their Charlie Hebdo things, and it will never be enough. Because for every 12 people you kill, the cartoons will be published here, and they'll be published here, and they'll be published here, and they'll be published here. Live as free people, and don't let the hate speech fairies and the Islamic enforcers, you know, the good cop, bad cop of totalitarianism, don't let them tell you you are not free. You are free, and on this 10th anniversary of these cartoons, that is the one thing they cannot take away from you. Thank you very much.
We have 10 minutes left for questions and answers. And Odin, you were waiting before the break. Dan, over here.
Hi, my name is Graham Thompson. I shall enunciate especially for you, as I come from a country that's worse English than North America called England. I read a few months ago a couple of articles by Melanie Phillips and Douglas Murray that said the way to defeat jihad is to convince Islam to reform itself. And I was somewhat knocked sideways by that. I think if we wait for Islam to reform itself to defeat jihad, we will be defeated by jihad. I think if we wait for Western leaders to get real about jihad, Western leaders who were saying 5 years ago said multiculturalism had failed, now they are welcoming a Muslim invasion, will be defeated by jihad. A suggestion I would make is that we take advantage of otherwise meaningless European elections and form a European Democratic Party to contest them on a counter-jihad ticket. I would be interested in your thoughts.
Well, I think that it will eventually come if the mainstream parties refuse to confront it. I didn't see that by Melanie and Douglas, and I do disagree with it to this extent, in that I think to a certain extent the reform of Islam has taken place, and this new pan-Islamic identity that people have is the reform. A generation ago, there were lots of little variants on Islam, lots of mom and pop Islam you'd see in the Balkans and Central Asia. There was syncretic Islam in Singapore and southern Thailand and Indonesia, and a lot of that has been went away when the Soviet Union and Tito's Yugoslavia and the Indonesian dictatorship went away. I believe Islam historically has been moderated by the overarching culture. The British managed to do it in India with some success, to the point where the Muslims were some of the bravest and loyalist soldiers of the Queen in the heyday of imperialism. But that requires cultural confidence of the kind that we no longer have. As Douglas made a point about female genital mutilation. You can chart the attitudes from General Napier's attitude to Sooty, the practice of burning the widow of a dead Indian on a funeral pyre, to our attitude to female genital mutilation, where people, I think it was Germaine Greer who said, the famous Australian feminist, who said that, well, one man's mutilation is another man's beautification. It all depends on how you look at it. That's what she said about female genital mutilation. The American Association of Pediatric Physicians thought that calling it mutilation was too pejorative a term, so they wanted to just call it a nick, a little nick. You know, they were just going to give you it was like mutilation light. It was meeting, Kipling said, east is east and west is west, and there the twain shall meet. But this was a way of getting them to meet, because in the east you have female genital mutilation, the full thing. You go in there and you can't order a la carte, you get the whole thing, you boomf. This was a way of east and west meeting. So we do a little female genital mutilation light. And the American Association of Pediatric Physicians did this. The female genital mutilation, insofar as I understand the point of it, it's to deny a woman sexual pleasure. Personally, I managed to do that without female genital. I've had no problem doing that for decades now. You can ask all kinds of people. Douglas is right. If we can't even stand against that, if we tiptoe around about that, and that is where cultural confidence comes in. We have to say, we actually have to do what General Napier said, and said that in our cultural tradition, he said to the sooty fellows, you can follow your cultural tradition and burn the widow on the funeral pyre, but if you do, we'll follow our cultural tradition and hang you. And that is what we need to do with female, and that is the only way we will successfully end this. Otherwise, we will have, in effect, we will have a situation where Muslims form European political parties and other people form counter-Muslim parties, and we will be on the path to a civil war on this continent.
Thank you so much for a wonderful speech. My name is Odin Rasset, and influenced by Michel Houellebecq, I wanted to ask you whether Europe still has the capacity for discernment concerning our drift toward what looks more like Islamic society, how we are giving into Islamic demands, and also not only on the left but also on the right, that we to a lesser degree manage the great array of different opinions, so that we maybe dream for more control and subjected society.
I think there's a lot of I think that's a lot of truth in that. Houellebecq's novel, which now there is a guy who doesn't deny women sexual pleasure. That's like 40% of the novel. But the bit that's dealing with Islam and Europe is very interesting, because he well understands the seductive appeal of Islam in a society that's increasingly without order. And someone said earlier that there aren't many people who are willing to defend. It's always been a small number of people who defend freedom, and in particular free speech. And I think that the difficulty here, and why we're ripe for the arguments of Islam, is because if you go to almost any Western university now, there is a correct view of certain issues. There's a correct view of feminism, there is a correct view of gay rights, there is a correct view of abortion, there is a correct view of climate change. And the other view isn't just incorrect, but increasingly it's a view that should not be heard. So that if you happen to disagree on same-sex marriage or climate change, it's not just that you have a disagreement and you and the other fellow argue about it, it's that you shouldn't actually be allowed on campus to put your point of view. And so if you raise two generations of people who think it's entirely normal that free speech does not extend to all kinds of areas of life, doesn't extend to gay rights, it doesn't extend to climate change, doesn't extend to transgendered bathrooms. What's the big deal about cutting Islam in on a little bit of that action? Islam is very, Islam, when I had my problems in Canada, the Canadian Islamic Congress's argument was always, well, Canada, like Europe, has hate speech laws protecting you from Jews being exposed to Holocaust denial, because it would upset them. So why shouldn't we also have laws permitting Muslims not to be offended? And that's the problem. That's why you shouldn't make the list to begin with. Because you can make a list and say, well, we're just going to criminalize Holocaust denial. But the minute you put one item on that list, it's easier to put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And so I think Houellebecq's point that that in effect you raise a generation or two that is inimical to freedom and is actually rather scared and likes the idea of an ordered society, and that's part of the appeal of Islam. I think that is well taken.
The last question.
Okay, how you doing, Mark? Good to see you back again. I was here 5 years ago. This is my quick question, but I'm curious, what happened to the female comic who was on the dais last time around? There's one person you didn't mention.
Yeah, Shabana Rahman. She had, who's from Norway, and I was interested in her because she, Mullah Krikar, who was the big Norwegian imam, and he was the one who made the famous line about, we will win in Europe because Europeans have 1.3 children and we breed like mosquitoes. And I quoted that line, and that was one of the indictments in the charge against me, that I'd quoted him. The Canadian Islamic Congress complained that I'd quoted Mullah Krikar correctly. It's not a question, no one denies he said it, they just felt it was like impolite of me to quote him in the thing. And Shabana was terrific company because she'd been on stage and Mullah Krikar had been in the audience doing her stand-up act. And you always want a comedy imam in the audience when you're doing a stand-up comedy act. It's a great thing. And he started yelling at her, and he eventually came up on stage, and he's quite a petite little imam. You know, he has a big beard, but everything else is tiny. And he came up on stage, and Shabana lifted him up. She picked up the imam. That's a big no-no in. Now talk about, don't pick up the imam. They firebombed her family's restaurant. That's how seriously it takes guts to do what she does. It takes guts to do what Lars Vilks does. But it's very important we don't lose them because it's not a subtle strategy. For every one of those you shut up, for every Lars Vilks, they don't really care about whether they kill you or they drive you into hiding because they know that there's 99,999 people who will never, ever, ever draw Muhammad or pick up an imam ever again. We should all pick up imams. I'm going to go to the men's room at Copenhagen airport and pick up an imam. And that's Shabbat.
Just a quick comment on Shabana Rahman being a fellow Norwegian. She's doing well, and Mullah Krikar is in jail.
Thank you for that, Vebjørn. We need some optimism, so you delivered. And thank you all for coming here today, and thank you for